Get ready, Staten Island.
The Ferry Hawks are back at SIUH Community Park July 7th to the 12th for a 6-game series against the High Point Rockers. Tonight, first pitch is at 6:30. It's Thirsty Thursday with $5 Bud and Bud Light drafts. Friday, July 10th, first pitch is at 7 p.m. May the Force be with you on Star Wars Night with post-game kids glow around the bases with special lightsaber training packs.
Visit ferryhawks.com now to lock in your seats.
The Roger Stone Show on the Red Apple Podcast Network.
Welcome to the Roger Stone Show. You're in the Stone Zone on this sweltering afternoon. We have a great show for you today. Among those others joining us, Rod Martin, entrepreneur, businessman, but geopolitical thinker, literally one of the smartest guys I know. We're going to talk about the situation in Iran. We're also going to talk about the recent NATO summit, and also want to get his thoughts on Greenland, because I think there's a lot going on in the background regarding potential access or even acquisition of Greenland to join the United States. Also joining us, Congressman Tim Burchett from Tennessee. He has been very forceful in his demands that the FBI turn over all their documents regarding the death of former Democrat National Committee staffer Seth Rich. Seth Rich's murder has a lot to do with my own bogus trial when I was framed by the Mueller thugs in their witch hunt effort to get Donald Trump. So I'm anxious to talk to Tim Burchett, who is not like any other political figure I know, a guy who actually tells you what he thinks and didn't go to Washington to be somebody, but went to Washington to do something. And then lastly, actor, singer, producer, and Italian-American patriot Robert Davi joins us to talk about the controversy in New York City where Mayor Zoran Mondavi left Little Italy off of the map of ethnic enclaves and was immediately called out by the Italian-American Civil Rights League, whereupon he immediately retreated and blamed the whole thing on his predecessor, Mayor Eric Adams. So it's a chock-full show. I woke up this morning shocked, as I think many of you were, to hear that the U.S. Senator from South Carolina, Lindsey Graham, who was only recently overwhelmingly renominated in the South Carolina Republican primary, had died at age 71. His office says of a brief and sudden illness. The senator had just returned on a 20-hour flight from Ukraine, and it is important to look at the totality of Senator Lindsey Graham's record. He was born in Central South Carolina, lost both of his parents while still in college, and took responsibility for raising his younger sister. After law school, he served in the U.S. Air Force Judge Advocate General's Corps and remained in the reserves for decades, retiring ultimately as a colonel. Lindsey Graham entered Congress in 1995. Almost immediately rose to national prominence during President Clinton's treatment, as he worked to hold Clinton accountable. In 2002, he won the Senate seat once held by Strom Thurmond and became one of the leading Republican voices on national security. Now, there are some issues on which I strongly agreed with him, many other issues which I strongly disagreed with him. He was an outspoken and unwavering supporter of America's military, of Israel, and of U.S. strength abroad. He was at the same time one of the cheerleaders for what I think was the illegal overthrow of the duly elected democratic government of Ukraine under Barack Obama. And he was initially seen as a protege of Senator John McCain. It was only after John McCain's death that I think that Lindsey Graham came into his own. I cannot help but remember, as chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee, that he helped confirm many conservative judges and delivered on one of the most defining defenses of Justice Brett Kavanaugh during that bitter confirmation fight. Although Graham and Donald Trump clashed during the 2016 primary, Graham would ultimately become one of the president's most reliable Senate allies after the election, particularly when it came to the question of judges, national security, and major conservative priorities. At the same time, I did very distinctly remember Senator Lindsey Graham saying that those who marched on the Capitol on January 6th should have been shot in the head. It's interesting because I remembered that, and then I looked it up on artificial intelligence, specifically Grok. It told me that there was no evidence of that. It didn't take me long to look around and find an actual video of Senator Lindsey Graham saying exactly that. He also, according to record, called the White House counsel at the time and told him that President Trump should be removed under the 25th Amendment. This was in the wake of the January 6th protests at the Capitol. So it is a mixed bag. I think that Senator Graham was a skeptic about the recent MOU that we negotiated with the Iranian state, with Vice President J.D. Vance leading those negotiations. But I think he was right to be a skeptic. I mean, look, Donald Trump gave peace a chance, but it is abundantly clear that you cannot deal with these Islamic fanatics, and that their word is no good. Any agreement they make is made in the interest of buying more time in order to strengthen and bolster their position. President Trump said he actually spoke to Senator Graham just hours before his death. Graham, as I said, had just returned from a 20-hour flight from Ukraine, was pushing hard for the Save America Act to enact voter ID nationwide and finally secure elections. Perfect example of the areas where I agree with Senator Lindsey Graham. The president said that Graham sounded tired but strong, calling him really worker and like a member of the family. I was actually in the Oval Office on one occasion in which the president was very frustrated about the so-called blue slip system in the U.S. Senate. The blue slip system is a tradition by which the two senators of any given state must acquiesce in the appointment of a U.S. attorney in their state. In the old days, I guess you submitted a blue slip of paper. But it is not a law. It's not a regulation. It is a Senate tradition, one that frustrated President Donald Trump. It's interesting that under Joe Biden, Republican senators regularly gave the blue slip to all of the U.S. attorney nominees of Joe Biden. It is a common courtesy among parties. That only changed after Donald Trump made his shocking and extraordinary comeback, whereas the Senate has frustrated the appointments of U.S. attorneys, meaning that the president has a hard time managing his own Justice Department. The president called Lindsey Graham and expressed his frustration, and this is well beyond Lindsey Graham's capability. The president basically, I think, is going to miss Graham. You can say this, but Lindsey Graham was never boring, never timid, certainly never afraid of a fight. It is interesting that the morning 29 FBI agents armed to the teeth, though in full SWAT gear and brandishing fully automatic assault weapons, stormed my home at 6 o'clock in the morning to arrest me for the non-existent crime of lying to Congress under oath about matters that were completely and totally immaterial. In other words, you can't lie under oath about Russian collusion that doesn't exist, nor can you lie about contacts or immaterial from WikiLeaks that you never received. Ultimately, of course, Robert Mueller, in his final report, would be forced to admit all of that. But Lindsey Graham fired off a press release in which he demanded that the FBI director acknowledge who had approved the assault on my home for what was a first-time nonviolent crime, in which one would normally simply have your lawyer be contacted to say you were being charged, and you would quietly turn yourself in. I went back and checked. It was a great press release. It got Senator Graham great press coverage on that day. There were many people outraged about the treatment of my wife and I on that fateful morning. But Senator Graham never got an answer to his inquiry. So you have to wonder whether it was timed for maximum media coverage, but the results were not there. At the same time, now you look for how this seat will get filled in a relatively closely divided Senate. Now, I don't believe, unlike Steve Bannon, who last week predicted that the Democrats would win the Senate, I don't believe that that's true. The Senate seats in most of the states up are all in states where President Trump won by double digits. But because in this case, Lindsey Graham had been renominated in the primary, which, by the way, was never actually in doubt because South Carolina has what's called an open primary, meaning you don't have to be a registered Republican to vote in the primary. You can be a Republican, a Democrat, or in no party at all to vote in the primary. And Lindsey Graham's popularity with the general election populace was much greater than his popularity inside the party. Nonetheless, he won by a whopping 60% of the vote against a relatively strong and well-funded candidate. But because he was renominated and not reelected, there will be a special election for this seat. So what happens is that outgoing South Carolina Governor Henry McMaster, a close ally of President Trump's, will appoint someone to fulfill the balance of this term, which only runs until January of 2027. But before August 11th, there will be a deadline for a special election. It's a high probability that special election will be held on the date of the regular election, which would save the people of South Carolina an enormous amount of money. So for Lindsey Graham, like with all Christians, I wish he and his family well. I agreed with him on some things. I disagreed with him on other things. I do recall one time at Mar-a-Lago when he was standing with his back to the pool at an outdoor cocktail party, and the idea go through my head that I might give him a playful push into the pool fully clothed. And my wife looked at me and said, "Don't you even think about it." So I abandoned that idea because I realized the Secret Service would immediately grab me and I would be banned forever from Mar-a-Lago. Too high a price to pay. On the other hand, I was not in the neocon wing of the party with Lindsey Graham, but I respected his patriotism. I respected his love of country. I respected his hard work. I respected his commitment to a conservative judiciary. And therefore, I say to you, with the shocking news, Senator Lindsey Graham of South Carolina, may you rest in peace. You're listening to the Stone Zone. We'll be back with a lot more. We're going to talk about Iran. We're going to talk about the recent NATO conference in Ankara, Turkey. We're going to talk about the Seth Rich murder. And we're going to talk about Zoran Mamdani and why he's now in full retreat when it comes to naming Little Italy as one of the important ethnic enclaves of New York City. Don't go away. We'll be right back.
The Roger Stone Show on the Red Apple Podcast Network.
My fellow Americans, if you think you know politics, think again. I'm Michael Cohen, and every week on When You Know, we're pulling back the curtain on power, politics, media, and the people making headlines. On my new WABC radio show, you'll hear conversations from names that you know. People like Jerry Falwell Jr., Anthony Scaramucci, Alan Dershowitz, and many, many more. Maybe, just maybe, we'll even hear from the president. No scripts, no spin, just real conversations with people who were in the room where it happened. And trust me, we've got some very big surprises coming. Look, I've spent years at the center of politics, controversy, and power. I know the players, I know the stories, and now I'm bringing you inside. When You Know, Sundays at 5 p.m. on WABC Radio, and When You Know Unleashed, wherever you get your podcasts. Because with me, you never know who's going to show up.
The Roger Stone Show.
Entertaining and informative.
On the Red Apple Podcast Network.
Well, here's some not so shocking news. Turns out that the Manhattan prosecutor who led the so-called hush money case against President Trump, in which the 45th and 47th president was ultimately, I think wrongfully, convicted of 34 counts of falsifying business records, played a much larger role in the federal case against the commander-in-chief than previously known. We were told at the time that Matthew Coangelo, who was the prosecutor in that case, joined the Manhattan District Attorney's Office, that would be Alvin Bragg, in December 2022, after resigning as a principal deputy associate attorney general of the United States in Washington. At that time, the sitting Attorney General of the country, Attorney General Merrick Garland, testified under oath that he himself had nothing to do with it, saying, quote, "I assume he applied for the job and then got the job." It turns out that seems to be a lie. Defenders of Colangelo tried to distance him from the Trump-related activities at the DOJ, but calendar records obtained by the conservative watchdog group America First and shared with the New York Post showed that he sat in on all of the key meetings about the prosecution of the once-and future president. At least 3 of those meetings related to the disputed national security records held at Trump's Mar-a-Lago resort that led to his indictment later by special counsel Jack Smith. As we now know, the FBI repeatedly insisted that there was not additional necessary probable cause for that raid, only to be overruled by Merrick Garland's Justice Department and special counsel Jack Smith in that extra constitutional effort to stop Donald Trump from running again. Thinking back to it, I remember that one clip of video I saw in which Joe Biden was asked whether he was concerned about whether he could win a rematch with Donald Trump. And he smiled and grinned for a second. He said, "No, because we're not going to let him run." I think that says it all. Colangelo, it was, according to these documents, joined the December 2021 meeting concerning the Department of Justice's position in the case by E. Jean Carroll, a civil case against President Trump for sexual abuse. Trump lost that case. The Supreme Court has now denied his appeal, has been ordered to pay $5 million. To me, the tragic flaw is the judge never allowed the jury to hear the fact that Trump had been acquitted on the specific charge of rape, a rape that never happened. I don't think the sexual abuse happened either. Another 12 items uncovered in these records include meetings regarding the subpoena of Trump's former White House counsel, Don McGahn, for obstruction, testimony and obstruction for justice findings in the former counsel Robert Mueller's report on claims that the 2016 campaign had colluded with Russia. Either we have a Sixth Amendment or not. The fact that Donald Trump's personal attorneys were compelled and ordered by a federal judge to testify against him on what was privileged information and conversations shows you the extent they went to which they would do anything necessary to keep Donald Trump off the ballot, to destroy him financially, and as well as to imprison him if they could. These shocking new records show that this was all directed from Washington. All those New York prosecutions, whether it is the so-called valuations case, which was ultimately overturned, now on appeal by the state, whether it was the E. Jean Carroll case, which it appears the president has now lost, with the Supreme Court refusing to overturn that, I think, erroneous conviction. And in this last remaining case, which the president faces a no penalty sentence that was announced 10 days before his second inauguration. So he's waiving the possibility, the court waived the possibility of prison times or fine. Just shows you that this was an unprecedented dirty trick, perhaps the second greatest abuse of power, second only to the Russian collusion hoax. I'm Roger Stone. When we come back, Rod Martin's going to talk to us about what's going on in Iran, and later on in the show, Congressman Tim Burchett is going to talk to us about the Seth Rich murder, so don't go away.
The Roger Stone Show on the Red Apple Podcast Network. The Roger Stone Show.
Entertaining and informative.
On the Red Apple Podcast Network.
Welcome back. You're in the Stone Zone right here at the Roger Stone Show. Joining me now is one of the smartest guys I know, Rod D. Martin. He's the founder and CEO of Martin Capital, but more importantly, he's a technology entrepreneur, an investor, a futurist, a geopolitical sage, literally one of the smartest guys I know. When I want to formulate my own opinions, I go to his website, which is rodmartin.org, or you can find him on Substack, and or catch one of his incredible interviews. I often formulate my views based on his sage analysis. Rod, thanks for joining us today on the Roger Stone Show.
Hey, it's great to be here. Thank you.
So I guess I want to start. I saw a great interview with you regarding the war in Iran. It seems to me that Donald Trump has given peace a chance, but as many, I think, have correctly said, you can't reach agreement with people whose word is no good and who will never stop in their efforts to destroy our country and our civilization and to impose their will on others. The question now, of course, is, having gone the extra mile to try to bring peace and having had those agreements cobbled out by Vice President J.D. Vance as well as his other negotiators violated by the Iranians, what happens next?
Well, you know better than anybody that Donald Trump is always finding more than one way to win, and he's always doing several things at once with every chess move, and that was certainly the case here. The single most important thing we did was not showing the world that we really were willing to negotiate. The most important thing was that we used the negotiations to get the different factions in Iran fighting each other. And there have been multiple high-level assassinations of senior people for reasons of, a car wreck here or some accident over there. And it's just obvious what's happening. And it's going back and forth primarily between the faction of the mullahs who control the assembly of experts that picks the next Ayatollah versus the IRGC, which has become something of a power unto itself. The more these guys kill each other, the better it is for us and Iran and the world. And every time Donald Trump has pronounced some peace initiative, some breakthrough, some kind of deal, he has pushed whichever faction that most annoys to be even more annoyed at the others. So it has really been a brilliant use of time during which we have surreptitiously but clearly gotten control of actual traffic through the Strait. Yes, Iran is harassing it. CENTCOM announced today how many ships are actually flowing freely through the Strait. We brought global oil prices down to roughly where they were on February 27th. Gas prices are on their way. And as you've seen, the president and the Republicans' poll numbers generally are moving back in the right direction. So he's accomplishing many things at once. But at the end of the day, these people are an existential threat to everyone they hate, which is basically everyone. And if they aren't disarmed, not just their nuclear program, but their ballistic missiles as well, they will eventually do something horrific that can't easily be come back from, and that's exactly what the president is preventing.
Yeah, there are some people who don't realize the historical record here, but Donald Trump has said since 1988 that there was no circumstance under which he would allow the Iranian regime to have nuclear weapons. So this is not some new position on his part, nor is it a departure from what he ran on. Look, he's an anti-interventionist. I don't think he likes endless foreign war when that endless foreign war has no obvious purpose, has no obvious goal. That's not the situation here. And look, I'm if I had to put myself in a wing of the party, I'm probably more in the Ron Paul wing of the party myself, but I'm also a realist. And if the intelligence indicated to the president that the Iranians were, as they said and boasted at the negotiation table, had enough enriched uranium to build either 7 or 11 bombs, and therefore he mounted Midnight Hammer and then Epic Fury, well, then I support the president. I also supported his effort to try to bring this conflict to a close, but it's clear that it takes two to tango. One of the things that I spoke about earlier this week, I saw that you also mentioned in your interview, of course, is the importance of Karg Island and the vulnerability of Karg Island. Karg Island is a small island through which 90% of Iran's energy output, that's oil, flows mostly to China. So far, the president has not directly hit Karg Island. In other words, he has not damaged the the pipe infrastructure there that goes directly to their oil fields, hoping to save it for a post-regime Iran's prosperity. But he certainly could do that, and that would basically choke off the lifeblood, the economic lifeblood of the mullahs.
As military operations go, this would be as close to a cakewalk as you're going to get. The island is significantly offshore from Iran. It processes 90% of Iran's oil exports to the world, and it is not as well defended as one might think. The only strikes the president has authorized on Karg Island so far have been against those defensive positions. As you say, I'm convinced that the president not only wants but can envision and is hoping to bring to pass, a little bit beyond our ability to guarantee, but hoping to bring to pass a free Iran. And that being the case, they're going to need Karg Island. They're going to need their other infrastructure as intact as possible. And the president's conduct of this war has been almost exclusively against the IRGC, not even against the Artesh, which is the official national army of Iran, but the actual Iranian Revolutionary Guards Corps. So he has been extremely careful about this. We can take Karg Island. I think he would like to avoid it because there is the potential for collateral damage to the infrastructure. The bigger thing is it would actually be boots on the ground, and he doesn't want that. He isn't getting us into a forever war like Bush. He is ending one. The Iranians have been on the attack for 47 years. Donald Trump is bringing it to a close. He is going to win this conclusively, and I really don't doubt that one bit. The past several weeks of peace talks actually just reaffirm what I think is his commitment to seeing this to a successful conclusion, and successful will not make sense to the New York Times.
I completely and totally agree. Let me now turn to, you had some very sage comments about NATO. We had recently had a NATO meeting in Ankara, Turkey, where it appears that the president had to take the Spanish to the woodshed because of their unwillingness to pay their fair share for their defense. Now, I'm kind of a hardliner. I think that the NATO alliance has outlived its usefulness. It made sense to me after World War II when Europe was largely economically and physically devastated, but America was still relatively prosperous. But today, it seems to me to outlive its usefulness. First of all, our NATO allies, they don't seem to want to pay their fair share for their defense. And then secondarily, when we make a strategic decision, such as our attack on Iran, they refuse to let us use their airspace. They refuse, in the case of Spain, for example, or they refuse to let us use our bases that we built in their countries, thinking of Italy. What is your take on this recent NATO meeting and where the NATO alliance is heading?
Well, I think you're absolutely right that if NATO had wound down in 1992, that would not have been the end of the world at all. In fact, and I'm pro-NATO. I think NATO can have utility. But if we had ended it at the end of the Cold War, where was the threat that would justify its ongoing existence? It just wasn't there. And NATO expansion has clearly been provocative to the Russians. I'm not saying that we're responsible for Russia invading its neighbors. That's certainly not true. But we certainly created an environment in which a Vladimir Putin could succeed our friend Boris Yeltsin. So you know, all of this has been kind of needless. At the present, okay, we've decided we think it's valuable. Okay, we can continue with that, but not on the current terms. Elbridge Colby talks about a NATO 3.0, where 1.0 is during the Cold War, 2.0 is this mission creep nightmare that has existed since the end of the Cold War, and then 3.0 being a reversal back to its roots of actual active defense. And I have to hand it to Merz who actually stood up in Ankara and said flat out in his capacity as Chancellor of Germany, the numbers are ridiculous. Donald Trump may be rude, but he's not wrong. America's paying about 80% of the bill. Europe's paying about 20%. He is right that that's unacceptable. It has always been unacceptable. So it's good to hear that out of Germany. I wish we could hear it out of London. I guess we just need to elect Nigel Farage, and we will. And the Spanish have to get their act together. There is absolutely no way we're going to subsidize that much longer if they don't.
Excellent analysis. I point out that in his first term, Donald Trump got our NATO allies to cough up $650 million in past due, let's call them dues for sake of a better discussion, for their own defense. And this has been an abusive relationship. I think the problem here is our NATO allies are not used to having an assertive American president who demands that they carry their own load. And it makes ending the conflict between Russia and Ukraine exceedingly difficult. I still think those who argue that this is about democracy, please, Zelensky has not had an election now in years, doesn't want an election because he knows he would lose an election. This is the meat grinder continues. The Russians seem to have endless capacity for war. No one is winning. The death tolls are unacceptable, yet this entire conflict winds on. The Ukrainians seem to have done some damage to the Russians in this past week alone. It is interesting that the situation in Iran seems to have been, I won't say a distraction, but there's less focus on the war between Russia and Ukraine. And I know that, of course, was the president's highest priority going into this second term. I'm still hopeful that he can find a way to end that. We've got about 2 minutes before we have to take a quick break. Rod, why don't you get a final thought in there? About a minute, actually.
I think the president has handled this brilliantly. He gets zero credit for it, but the truth is he's the one who took the gloves off and let Zelensky start hitting those deep Russian targets like Omsk, like St. Petersburg, like Moscow, which was absolutely necessary to get Putin to the table. I am really, really proud of how this administration has handled the war.
So much for those who are saying that Donald Trump is in the pocket of the Russians, a complete absurdity. Look, I had members of my own family killed by Russian tanks in Budapest in 1956, but it doesn't stop people on the far left from saying that I'm a Russian apologist or some kind of Russian intelligence asset. Anyway, we have to take a quick break, and then we'll be back with more of Rod Martin. Go to rodmartin.org. You can see his brilliant interviews and some of the great stuff that he's written, and we'll be right back.
The Roger Stone Show on the Red Apple Podcast Network. The Roger Stone Show on the Red Apple Podcast Network.
And we're back in the Stone Zone. Joining me is Rod Martin, who is the author of the Rod Martin Report. You can go to rodmartin.org, or you can go to Substack. I strongly recommend that you subscribe. He is a brilliant analyst of the geopolitical scene, both domestically and internationally, and I'm always happy to have him on the show. Rod, I guess here's a little bit of a curveball. I continue to be shocked at the fact that Senator Mitch McConnell, who was evidently stricken some days ago, has not been seen or heard from. We have assurances from his staff that he is still with us, but it bothers me that a member of the Senate doesn't show himself or show some other evidence that he's really still alive. And then adding to this mystery is the fact that his wife, Elaine Chao, who's the longest-serving member of the Bush cabinet and also a long-serving member of the Trump cabinet in the first term as Secretary of Treasury, left immediately for China, where her family very undeniably has ties to some of those very high up in the Chinese Communist Party. Rod, what do you make of all this?
You know, the McConnell thing feels a little bit like Yuri Andropov and Konstantin Chernenko. You know, there's this sense of the Soviet leader is dead, but we're not going to tell you for a couple more weeks. I don't know what's happened to Mitch McConnell, but the only people who have claimed to speak to him are not entirely credible on that point. So that's disturbing, but, you know, it'll resolve one way or another. The real question is Elaine Chao going to China in the middle of her husband being in this state? That's actually kind of weird and disturbing, and I think you're right to call it out. I don't know why she's there, but I would hope that my wife would not be in China when I'm on my deathbed. That's just really strange.
It does kind of have a Weekend with Bernie feel to it. And now, of course, I hate to see this, but with the sudden and kind of shocking death of Senator Lindsey Graham, who I agreed with on some things and disagreed with others, there's no evidence of foul play. There's no evidence that he was assassinated by the take your pick, by the Russians or by the Iranians or any other evidence of foul play. The FBI Director, Kash Patel, has announced that they will conduct an investigation to ensure that is the case, but it appears to me that the senator died of what was probably a heart attack or some other heart-related ailment. Look, he was worked very hard. He constantly ate fast food. He had just done a 20-hour flight from Ukraine, but it just seems we saw this, and I saw you commenting on it before in the Charlie Kirk case. People jump to these extraordinary conclusions. I guess those are the people they call conspiracy theorists, but neither in the case of Lindsey Graham nor in the case of Senator Mitch McConnell does there appear to be foul play. Different processes to fill both of those seats. It is unfortunate that in the case of Lindsey Graham, because he had been renominated in the primary but he had not been reelected, there will be a special election. On the other hand, I think you agree with me, at this point the state is reliably red, and it will produce a Republican senator. Meantime, the current outgoing governor, Henry McMaster, good man, known him since he was the U.S. Attorney under Ronald Reagan, gets to appoint a successor who may or may not be the candidate who runs in a special election. I want to thank my guest, Rod Martin, and tell you one more time, go to rodmartin.org, or go to his Substack. He is literally one of the smartest guys I know, and we're honored to have him with us today. Rod, thanks for joining us.
The Roger Stone Show on the Red Apple Podcast Network. The Roger Stone Show.
Entertaining and informative.
On the Red Apple Podcast Network.
Welcome back into the Stone Zone here on the Roger Stone Show. This past week, U.S. Congressman from Tennessee, Tim Burchett, is demanding transparency in one of Washington's most sensitive unsolved cases. That would be the 2016 murder of DNC staffer Seth Rich. Earlier this week, Burchett announced that he had formally asked FBI Director Kash Patel to release all FBI records relating to Rich's death. Now, the reason this is significant is because Seth Rich's death has become the center of intense public speculation after claims emerged that he may have been connected to leaked DNC emails that essentially destroyed Hillary Clinton's campaign for president. I know a lot about this because when I was framed by Robert Mueller and his thugs, the underlying thesis of my indictment was that the Russian intelligence had hacked the Democrat National Committee in order to purloin these emails subsequently published by WikiLeaks. They never produced any evidence to bolster that. I believe it is untrue. The judge, of course, wouldn't let me bring expert testimony or forensic evidence in which I could have proved that there absolutely, positively was no online hack of the DNC by the Russians or anyone else. That leads to extensive speculation that Seth Rich, the 27-year-old DNC staffer who was brutally murdered on the morning of July 10th, 2016, may have been the source of that information. Congressman Tim Burchett is a solid conservative. He's unlike any other member of Congress that I know, somebody who actually went to Washington to do something rather than to be someone, and we're privileged to have him join us now. Tim, welcome to the Roger Stone Show.
It's always an honor being on with you, Mr. Stone, and call you a friend means a lot more to me than you'll ever know. But thank you for bringing this out. It's kind of odd that none of my colleagues have really pushed for this. You know, you and I were, and the public was told the FBI didn't have these files. And then, dadgummit, all of a sudden, there's thousands of pages. Thank goodness Kash Patel is pushing it. I mean, you know, everybody's like, well, why doesn't he do this, do that? I think he's like Chesty Puller in the Marine Corps, 1st Marine Division at the Chosin Peninsula up there. I think he's just covered at all sides. And they're coming at him from every direction. There's just so much, I think, within our Justice Department that needs to be looked at. And every rock you turn over, there's something crawls out from under it. And this is just another case, I think, has told us that maybe they found these things in a burn bag or something in a room they didn't know existed. You know, it's just too much. And this kid, it's just too much. They say it was a botched robbery. Now, how do you botch a robbery? You kill the kid and you don't take anything. They always talk about they didn't take his watch. They didn't take his wallet. I mean, they would have taken his, you've lived in Washington, D.C. longer than I've been on this earth. They would have taken his dadgum shoes. You know that. And then they found him like that. And then all of a sudden the FBI says, we're not going to touch it. And then it's handled by the local Washington, D.C. police, and you know that ain't happening. So as we say at East Tennessee, that dog don't hunt. That dog definitely is not hunting. So you got a dead kid, obviously at the tip of the spear on this stuff, and the Clintons, and everybody's afraid to say what's going on. I just want some answers.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. It was actually in my trial, in the pretrial motions, that the FBI was forced to admit that they never actually inspected the computer servers of the DNC, and therefore no one can definitively say that there was an online hack. The Democrat National Committee claimed that they had brought in a third-party IT firm called CrowdStrikes, and the CrowdStrikes had a report that proved that the Russians had hacked the DNC. The judge refused to turn that report over to my defense attorneys at trial. We would later learn that the chairman of CrowdStrikes, one Sean Henry, who just coincidentally happens to be a former deputy to Robert Mueller at the FBI, testified before the House Intelligence Committee that his report had no proof of a Russian hack. That kind of leads back to Seth Rich. Then you have the fact that at the time, Julian Assange himself, when asked about whether Rich was a source, said, well, we don't comment on sources, but it is very dangerous to be a source for us, and then offered a $20,000 reward leading to information regarding the murder of Seth Rich. So I think that you've taken a very stalwart stand here. I agree with what you say about Kash Patel, who I think is a good man, but who inherited a thoroughly corrupted organization. The rot is very deep in the deep state. They had 8 years during Barack Obama to infiltrate every department of government with these careerists who are not nonpartisan. They're not just bureaucrats. They're active leftists in many cases. And it is very difficult when you have a handful of people in your department you can trust. I think this is true at the DOJ as well. I think Todd Blanche is a good man trying to do a good job, but if the Senate won't confirm Donald Trump's U.S. attorneys, and therefore the prosecutors out in the field in the various states don't answer to this Justice Department, how can you have control over the process of justice? It is deeply disturbing.
I couldn't agree with you more, and I had a very similar conversation with our president and I talked to him about that. Just that you add the top 2 or 3 people in these departments, you fire whoever, but you've got it's those layers of the onion, that the unknown that you don't know. And I have people say, well, just fire the whole FBI, fire the whole CIA. Well, you can't do that either, because you've got, they're in the middle of investigations and, international espionage, and you've got you know these people. The majority of them, I think, are good, patriotic Americans. A lot of them are veterans, Marine Corps people like my daddy. And but you got so many in there that are just infiltrated, and at the right time push the right buttons. And I think the left, the hierarchy, or the swamp, or the deep state, as you call it, they know whose buttons to push, and that's why these things happen time and time again. It sort of reminds me of a little bit. I was 4 years old at the time, but Chappaquiddick. You had a powerful family, and you had a person pass away, and then all of a sudden it just kind of goes away. And this is what's happened here. The family's not raising any questions, and you just don't know all the details. And I said nothing happens by accident, or in Washington, D.C., nothing happens by accident. And it's just, I don't know if we're going to know about it unless the Lord comes, or on the other side in heaven, I'll probably figure it all out. But by then, it won't matter. So I'm just really concerned about this thing and this kid, and I think there needs to be some justice, and some people need to be brought to light. Do I think it'll happen? Probably not, but I'm going to keep plugging. I'm realistic, but I'm idealistic. So I get the whole program up there, but it disgusts me, as I know it disgusts you, sir.
Well, I think just based on the evidence, you've done the right thing here. The FBI initially claimed it had no relevant records whatsoever, but then it later admitted that it had more than 20,000 pages of potentially relevant material. And they finally admitted that they do have Seth Rich's work laptop, as well as an image of his personal laptop. It is odd that the family, which today argues for privacy and insists that they believe it was robbing, that's not what they said initially. They said that only after the crisis manager for the Democrat National Committee became their spokesperson. All extremely suspicious. And I hope we do get to the bottom of it. Obviously, I have a personal dog in this particular fight, since numerous media outlets claim falsely that I was a go-between between Russian intelligence and WikiLeaks and so on, all of which, of course, was completely and totally false. I do want to ask you about the SAVE Act, because to me, when 97% of the American people are for something this simple as requiring that you be an actual citizen of the United States in order to vote in our federal elections, and you have a photo ID to prove it, when we can't pass that, it seems to me there's something fundamentally wrong with the system.
Yes, sir, and I believe the people that are fighting it, ultimately, there's only one reason that they would do that, and I'm going to be blunt, is that they themselves are part of the problem. They understand that it's crooked, and they go along with it. And to me, that means that they're probably compromised. I think it goes back to the days maybe prior to Newt Gingrich in Congress and in Senate, where the congressmen and senators, they spend all their time on the dadgum golf course. And if you're hearing that in the background, that is gunfire. We appreciate the Second Amendment in Tennessee, and I live out here on a farm, and my neighbor's always doing target practice on Sunday. I guess they're celebrating the Day of the Lord by shooting off some firepower, and I'm okay with that. But you've just got so many conflicting interests in D.C., and these people, they want to be on the golf course, they want to be at the country club, and then leadership calls them and tells them, hey, we're going to have a vote, y'all come on in, and then they tell them how to vote. And that's basically, it's Washington to a T. I go back to Washington, and people always say to me, man, you get all these vacations. You know what? I work twice as hard when I'm at home than I do in Washington, D.C. I tell somebody I go back to Washington to catch up on my rest for my 2-hour work weeks. The system is compromised. It's broken. It's a trash can. We don't need to pick and choose. We need to put a garden hose to it and turn the whole dadgum thing up and start and clean it out. And that's what we do every election year. But 12% of the population is probably going to vote, so I'm not sure if we'll get there this time.
Yeah, it is very frustrating. I do think the SAVE Act is a big part of the answer. We have to ensure that the next elections are fair and honest, and I have my reservations. Of course, that means they immediately call you a conspiracy theorist. So in other words, when more people vote in the city of Philadelphia than are registered to vote, nothing to see here. Or more people vote in Orange County, California, 2 congressional districts or 3 congressional that are registered to vote. No, that's not odd at all. You must be some kind of a nut, some kind of a kook. I mean, look,
or a one total precinct votes for one Democrat candidate and the Republican gets nothing. I mean, even in Knoxville's inner city, in the worst precincts I have, I'll pick up 2 or 3%. You know, it's just you got to figure somebody's going to hit the button somewhere by accident of that many people. You know, I mean, it's just ridiculous, Mr. Stone, and you're exactly right. And they label us conspiracy theorists, they label us racist, Islamophobic, anti-trans, whatever. I just want them to be fair. And that is nothing more sacred than our elections, and we should treat it that way.
All right, you're tuned in to the Roger Stone Show, and you're in the Stone Zone. We're talking to Congressman Tim Burchett, one of my all-time favorites.
The Roger Stone Show on the Red Apple Podcast Network. The Roger Stone Show.
Entertaining and informative.
On the Red Apple Podcast Network.
And we're back in the Stone Zone right here on the Roger Stone Show, and we're talking to Congressman Tim Burchett from Tennessee's 2nd District. He is a former mayor of Knox County, an outspoken advocate for taxpayers and veterans and the American people, and unlike any other politician I've ever met. In fact, Tim, I'm sorry, I don't mean to insult you by calling you a politician. You're a political leader.
Pretty word.
It really has become a dirty word. I don't consider the President of the United States a politician. I consider him the leader of a political movement. I do have to ask you this question. How do you feel about these upcoming midterm elections? Some of our brethren, I think, have prematurely thrown in the towel. I still am pretty optimistic that we have an actual platform and record to run on, while the Democrats don't seem to have anything other than their hatred for Donald Trump and the fact that they keep nominating candidates who are more aligned with Karl Marx than they are with John F. Kennedy.
I couldn't agree with you more, Mr. Stone. As a matter of fact, I always talk about messaging, and I get angry with our party. Our worst thing is we have not talked about the good things that we've done. The big, beautiful bill, largest tax decrease for working class Americans that we've ever seen. Energy independence, all these things were wrapped up in it. And that's the problem with putting in a big bill. Donald Trump could message that, but the Republican Party couldn't message their way through wet toilet paper. That's our problem. We don't talk. The week of his incredible speech on the State of the Union address, we spoke. Our message that week was on appliances and deregulating appliances, and we had all this great stuff. The president served us up, I think, but finally the Democrats have given us an issue I don't think that they can run from, is electing communists. To think that this woman in New York City, and when the Democrats do not denounce her, they support her. The silence speaks volumes to me. And she is she's a radical, first of all. But second of all, when she says she wipes her hand on the American flag like a napkin, that's that same flag that American men fought and died for to free the slaves. That's that same American flag that hangs on my wall, the 48 star one that my uncle died fighting under. The same 48 star flag my father killed people under in the Pacific. That flag has gone through a lot, and I think we need to start talking about that every chance we get, and ask the Democrats, are they going to seat this woman? Will they vote to seat her because she will win? And are they going to continue down this destructive path to stay in power? And I think there's a clear divide there. But we've got to get some guts. We got to take the gloves off. President Trump has shown that time and time again. He takes the gloves off. He tells America the straight truth. Reagan was good at it. Trump is great at it. in this and in this political dialogue. Nobody is better. And I think we could learn a lesson from him. And that if we do not take the majority, it will be because of that simple reason, is that we are not messaging what's going on.
I could not agree more. Plus, I think you're going to find that this socialist takeover of the once great Democrat Party is not limited to urban enclaves like New York City or Washington, D.C. We saw it last week in Colorado, where a veteran congresswoman was defeated. We saw it in New York City, interestingly enough, where we saw an incumbent unhoused quite easily. So it's a party-wide phenomenon.
It's happening in Knoxville, Tennessee. The Democrat candidate for county mayor, who's running against my friend Betsy Henderson, a dynamic young lady. Her family's Greek, hardworking Americans. They love the American dream. They are running against a guy who marched with Maduro. The guy that Trump took out, a communist murderer, and this guy marched with him, and he lost his job apparently at the union even. But the Democrats are wrapping their flag around him.
All right. Thank you to my guest, Tim Burchett, and we'll be right back.
The Roger Stone Show on the Red Apple Podcast Network. The Roger Stone Show on the Red Apple Podcast Network.
Welcome back to the Stone Zone in the Roger Stone Show. This was a tumultuous week when Mayor Zoran Mamdani released what his office called a list of New York City's ethnic neighborhoods, and missing from that list was Little Italy. Almost immediately, the Italian-American Civil Rights League jumped into action, putting out a strong statement, calling on the mayor to apologize and to restate the list. Almost simultaneously, I got a text from my very good friend, Robert Davi. Robert Davi, of course, is the award-winning prolific actor, screenwriter, director, producer, jazz vocalist, who, by the way, just had a triumphant tour of Foxwoods and their main room there, playing two nights there. By the way, Robert, I had cousins in the room. They said that your performance was extraordinary. And he immediately texted me because he is among those who is outraged by this action by the mayor. That got picked up in the New York Post, a terrific article. Die Hard actor Robert Davi, of course, appeared with Bruce Willis in Die Hard, unleashed on the mayor. I wanted to get him on the show and let him speak for himself. Robert Davi, welcome back into the Stone Zone.
Well, thank you, Roger, and bless you, man, and the Italian civil, the work you do there with that organization. It makes a difference, and you have to wake the people up because kids have not been educated. And what I had said in that article, when my grandparents, and I'm sure yours did, came from Naples and Sicily, my people came from at the turn of the 19th century. The Italian Americans came into this country and we were taught, speak the English, this is America. Work hard, you can do something. My grandfather, my father, he enlisted in World War I. He was critically wounded 3 times, got an oak leaf cluster and 3 Purple Hearts, went back into theater in the U.S. infantry. He worked on those buildings, as many of my uncles did, high-rises where Italian Americans and Irish and Jews and Germans and Dutch fell down from those towers, building. There were less than 100 Muslims in New York City at the time. And this is not a rant, as I said initially, against Muslims, against Indians, against any other ethnic sensibility. It's a rant against Mamdani's Marxist philosophical upbringing and where he was engendered from. His father, Mohammed Mamdani, was a Marxist. He got money from the United States government to come to America, to go to college, to go to Harvard. He got money from the Kennedy Foundation. The father got money for that. He was a Marxist then. He's a Marxist. His mother is a filmmaker who has a Marxist bent. This guy was born in that civilization, God bless him. Let him go to a Marxist country. Give me a Marxist country that's been successful. And Uganda which is, actually Tanzania. I think, no, it's not Tanzania. There was where he was born, where Mandami was born. Mandami. They have one of the lowest rates throughout South Africa, throughout Africa, all of Africa. I think they're rated 148 in terms of people being happy out of 154 or something, or 142 or something. I was reading something, but it's terrible that we have a guy here that doesn't understand America, that's been comes into the country and starts to, and it's been happening, as we know. Look, I've played many different characters. I've researched many different things. I played a Palestinian. I played an Orthodox Jew. I've done lots of different things. I have an understanding of what's going on politically with the social democratic families. David Horowitz, one of my first political mentors, comes from a Jewish, communist, Marxist family. He was part of that whole system. He wrote a book called Radical Islam and the American Left years ago, called Unholy Alliance, that people don't know about. People have to understand to see what's going on. And it's nothing against Muslims or anyone like that. It's about a political philosophy that's infected Catholicism, Islam, and everything else that wants to bring in this racial bigotry and communists that split everybody apart. And this guy takes a place like Little Italy, where I think the San Gennaro Festival, which you're involved with sometimes, Roger, and the Italian Civil Rights League, for years, for decades. And to ignore that, now I hear they put it back on the map. But still, there's Irish and Jewish neighborhoods that are not on the map, and I'm all for nice immigrants, everything, but what's going on in New York is disgusting. I feel like running for mayor. I feel like moving back to New York and running for mayor, because I don't think anyone's speaking out strong enough against AOC, against Bernie Sanders, and against him, because there's a seductive aspect to this that went in through education. Mandami's father is teaching at, I believe, Columbia, making $300,000 a year, where in Uganda, when he was a teacher, he was making maybe $15,000 a year. You come to America and you can have opportunity, and he sits there with his little smiley face, that smirky little face that he has, spoon-fed, whatever he's talking about. He believes, I'm sure he believes what he believes, but you cannot ignore the vibrancy of meritocracy and stop separating the people, the rich and poor game, that the Marxists do so well, that's their whole game plan. And yet when they have a country, everyone is in a worse position than they started. And that's what will happen to this great, beautiful city of New York, that our grandparents and great-grandparents and many others helped build those beautiful skyscrapers.
I totally agree with you. The Italian American Civil Rights League named you as one of their Men of the Year only 1 year ago for your outspoken advocacy and your defense of our culture, our history, and the important role that Italian Americans played in making this country great. Mike Crispy, a great friend of ours, was quoted last week when he said, "This was not a clerical error. This was cultural erasure. Little Italy's sacred ground. It's where Italian immigrants came with nothing, worked hard, opened shops, raised families, built churches, fed the city, and helped make New York what it is today." I think that hits it right on the head. This wasn't an oversight, although I did think it was kind of humorous that the mayor, who's one smooth character, kind of like Barack Obama, he's selling hope and change, doesn't really tell you what that is. But he blamed the whole thing on his predecessor. He said, well, the map was really prepared by the previous mayor, Eric Adams. We just released it. So he was immediately passing the buck. I think you're exactly right, but I would urge you not to run for mayor, only because you have to recognize the demographic changes of New York City. New York City today is about 11% Italian American. It is about 4.4% Irish American. It is less than a third Catholic, which is, of course, unthinkable. At the turn of the century, it was overwhelmingly Catholic. So you've had a dramatic change in the makeup of New York City, but they're still not candid about their true agenda. It's free this, free that, free health care, pretty soon it'll be free food. They're going to nationalize, or in this case, have the cities take over the grocery stores. I saw a great statement by Vicky Palladino, city council member from New York City, who basically says we're in a soft secession under Ziran. In other words, he considers New York to be an independent city-state with its own foreign policy, its own immigration policy, its own economic policy. Doesn't really recognize the authority of the federal government except to the extent that he can extract money or political wins from it. They intend to use the resources and authority of New York City to wage war against the federal government and the rest of the county. This is what the Democratic Socialists are quite open about. That's what they really plan to do. Colluding with the Iranians, as someone we found about yesterday. He actually had people in his administration who were going to meet with the Iranian ambassador. By the way, that's a violation of the Logan Act. You can't have your own foreign policy. It's a capital crime. But of course, he won't get called out on it because he's on the left. One of the questions I have to ask you, Robert, is because you are so outspoken and you're so stalwart and you're so articulate and you've been so consistent. I've read a number of the things you wrote for Breitbart. To what extent has that really hampered your career in terms of juicy roles and your opportunities for employment in today's Hollywood?
Well, first, it has hurt. And I'm going to pick up one thing about David Horowitz, whose families were communists. He was a communist, and then in the 1970s, he understood what they were doing with the socialist, democratic, and the dialectical materialism was manipulating the youth and how dangerous it was. And he wrote a book called Radical Son. I'm sure you know David Horowitz.
Yes, of course.
And Radical Son is another book where he showed, and people should understand this. They should be taught in universities, these young kids and these socialist Marxists in New York City should understand what these policies lead to. Yes, I've been hurt politically, career-wise. My agent will call up. They're interested in you this. They want to know your figures and all of that. But in spite of that, I've been doing films. I did season 4 of Tulsa King with Sylvester Stallone. That'll be coming out in October. I did the whole season 4. I play a tough character. His name is Turco, and he's very, very volatile, and it'll be interesting. And then right after that, I did a film that was directed by the man who wrote Green Book, who won 2 Oscars with John Travolta, called That's Amore, where I play Danny Amore, who's a nightclub singer, and Mira Savino plays my daughter, who falls in love with John's character, and Chaz plays John's father. Terrific film. We just finished it, and it's an old-fashioned, really with tons of music. John sings and dances. So that way I've been good, and I've got a film coming out in August called Bad News on the Doorstep, of all, a period piece. But yes, it has hurt in many, many aspects, Roger.
Well, and for people who don't understand, Robert Davi is a Class A celebrity and movie star. He's appeared with Marlon Brando, Robert Benigni, Bruce Willis, Clint Eastwood, Christopher Walker, and of course the great Frank Sinatra, the greatest of them all. And it has to be difficult, but he has been incredibly outspoken. It's why the Italian American Civil Rights League named him as one of the men of the year. By the way, if you're interested in joining Robert and I, we're both members of that organization, you go to IACRL.org, IACRL.org, Italian American Civil Rights League.org. It is a totally voluntary nonprofit. There's nobody making $1 off of this. Everybody contributes their time. And if Mondami intends to try to remove the statue of Christopher Columbus, which I would almost bet anything he's going to try to do, we will be in court the very next day. The next day.
Thank God. And that's happening all over the country. That's happened in Syracuse. I helped them in Syracuse. There's a thing that's been there since 1923 or even prior that the again, and I don't understand how these Marxists get into and I'm all for indigenous people. Have Indigenous Peoples Day another day, not Columbus Day. Columbus never had a slave. Do you understand that, kids? He never had a slave. Columbus didn't have a slave, and he didn't start war with the Indians. It came afterwards. Columbus had nothing to do with that aspect. As a matter of fact, he was on a boat back to Spain and being kind of reprimanded because he wasn't that way. So people don't know the true history of Columbus. They know this dialectical materialism that these guys throw off. And Noam Chomsky, you know, you've got the, what's his thing, linguistics. And this is what happens. This is what Mandami's father's a genius at. The mother is a genius at that because of the filmmaking and being able to infect it. So this kid comes here when he's 7 years old, bathed in that like Frank Marshall did to, from what I understand, Obama had the same kind of upbringing. And when Michelle Obama came, remember, this is the first time I'm proud of America. Well, come on. The Italians were called lower and dirtier than the Negro in 1906 by the New York Times. There were more lynchings, but my grandparents, I couldn't get into some waspy golf clubs because I was a greaseball Dago wop. But I didn't give a red rat's ass. I says, this is a thing. I can make my opportunity. They'll change. But yet they put this victimized mentality, and guys that have rent. There are people from other countries that are living off of America, getting welfare, getting Social Security, getting aid, and they're not paying their rent for some of these guys in New York City and other places. And they skip along. And that's another terrible thing, what's happening. The way the entrepreneur, and they want to say, and not slumlords, because I did a film called Mott Haven in the thick of it all, where gentrification was happening. And those buildings that some people were living in were decent, good buildings, well kept, clean, and people weren't paying their fair share.
I love it when Robert Davi gets on a rant. We're going to come back with more of him in just a minute. We're going to take a quick commercial break.
The Roger Stone Show on the Red Apple Podcast Network. The Roger Stone Show.
Entertaining and informative.
On the Red Apple Podcast Network.
Welcome back into the Stone Zone. We're talking to the international multi-dimensional star, Robert Davi, actor, screenwriter, director, producer, and an incredible jazz vocalist. I have little doubt that his forceful remarks regarding Little Italy being not present on the list of ethnic neighborhoods released by the mayor played a major role in the mayor's almost immediate retreat. And of course, then he blamed it all on his predecessor, Mayor Eric Adams. Point of personal privilege, because I cannot resist. As I pointed out earlier, Robert Davi is a movie star of the first rank, and he had the opportunity to appear opposite Frank Sinatra in the telefilm Contract on Cherry Street. Now, I'm fascinated by Old Blue Eyes, the chairman of the board, and in the few minutes we have left, Robert, I have to ask you, what was it like to work with the great man, and what was he like?
It was marvelous. He and I became fast friends. Even Frank Jr., before my shows, Frank Jr. was interviewed on a radio show, and he talked about my relationship with the father and pleased that I was doing the music. Frank was so supportive of me as a young actor. My agent couldn't get me a meeting. I walked up to casting on my own, and I wound up co-starring with Sinatra after I got fired from Fiorello's in New York City in the 70s, unjustly, and then we all had dinner there. Frank heard the story from Harry Guardino. We wound up having dinner there, and someone very New York savvy was with us and came back, left the table we were at Fiorello's. I mean, it was a funny experience, Roger. I'll tell you in person sometime about it. And the guy comes back to the table with an envelope and puts it on in front of me. I go, "What's this?" He goes, "Open it." It was a check. I go, "What is this?" He goes, "That's your severance pay," because I was unjustly fired. But Frank knew I was a forceps baby. He was sensitive. He was aware. And over the years, he would be supportive of me. And the big thing, recently, because of that rant with Mandami, a black pastor, Pastor Ben or something on X, I don't know if he's a pastor. I don't know what he is. But he criticized me as being a bigot. And I had to say that Frank Sinatra in the 1946 did a film called The House I Live In, and a song. And that was against anti-Semitism and racial bigotry. As we knew, who grew up at that era, Frank Sinatra was a beacon of fairness. He was no bigot. He taught the Italian community. He understood the struggle the Italian community went and the closeness we had to the black relationship. As Quincy Jones also was very affectionate toward me. So when you say something that goes against their political apparati, which there's a lot of them that for some reason have become Marxists. They have been, and that's not of people of all color, but they want to label you as a bigot or dead or washed up or whatever. And that's unfortunate. I shouldn't pay attention to that stuff, but it gets me because they don't know. They're uneducated. If you were educated, you couldn't say stuff like that. And this is where I find that most of the people, excuse me, even in Los Angeles, I went back there for a concert, excuse me, ladies and gentlemen, and Roger. I went back there for a concert a couple of weeks ago, sold out. I went into a CVS that I hadn't been in a neighborhood I used to pass. Guards. You had to go through security, get to a certain area. They had gates with alarms on them. Everything had a lock on it. Is this a society we're in? Is this what the Democrat Socialist Society is teaching people? Go in, free grab, as people are walking out of stores with tons of stuff. Is this the kind of dignity they want? And people aren't teaching them better? If I stole anything or I did anything dishonest, my mother and my father would duly punish me and tell me the right thing. Now, some people may not have families like that, but there's a morality that's been missing in this country.
Well, we have to leave it there. I want to thank our guest, Robert Davi, and it's right. Try to get some toothpaste or deodorant and see what happens to you. Many thanks for joining us today in the Stone Zone. God bless you and Godspeed.
Thanks for listening to The Roger Stone Show. You can hear The Roger Stone Show Sunday afternoons at 3. If you like the podcast, share it with your friends and listen anytime at WABCRadio.com and download the WABC Radio app. Hit that subscribe button on all major podcast platforms. Plus, follow WABC on social on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, and X. See you next time for a new episode so you never have to wonder.
What the heck is going on here?